What's the scariest story you know that is 100% true? Not sure if posted here, but a woman was abducted and raped by 2 men and then stabbed over 30 times. Her neck muscle completely removed, her guts spilling out. She crawled to the hospital with her head almost detached and survived. She wrote a book and now is a motivational speaker with 2 kids, despite the fact that she was disemboweled. If this is Allison, a South African girl, now woman, then there are some untruths in your story. Holy fuck, that is horrible. The scariest things that are told on this thread are not the accidents or the whistlers or the ghost sightings. It's what people, barbaric animals, can do to other human beings and think they can just get away with it. People are nothing more than glorified and intelligent beasts, and we must never forget that. A guy I know is a boat mechanic. So one Saturday he's on all alone in the shop doing some work on a boat, and suddenly he comes to and he's on the ground. He knew there was water under the boat he'd been working on, so he assumes he's been electrocuted. He's vaguely aware of someone behind him. So he starts yelling, "Help, help, I've been electrocuted," and he hears whoever is behind him leave. He keeps yelling and eventually a guy in a neighboring business hears him and comes to his aid. When he's at the hospital he finds out he wasn't electrocuted, someone had hit him on the back of the head with his own mallet. Nothing was stolen from the shop. Meaning someone, who was never caught, was just walking by and spontaneously decided to hit him on the back of the head with a mallet, for no reason. I just think it's so creepy. That's horrifying, I think so too. The completely random and pointless nature of it is just so unnerving. Have you seen the videos of groups of people jumping random individuals on the street for fun? They'll even video and post it themselves. There was a young girl kidnapped in the middle of the day on a neighborhood street in Springfield. Someone in the street witnessed the event and tried chasing the car on foot to at least get the plate number and call the police. They sent out an Amber Alert after a few hours, identified the owner of the vehicle and his residence, but by the time they got to his house, they found her undressed body in a plastic tub in his basement and she had been raped and shot dead. The most fucked up thing was that this guy was a middle school coach and he had child pornography in his house as well as photos of young girls from his middle school. We found out at my Catholic high school that the murderer was the son of our theology teacher. Our teacher left school for over a week, I'm sure, trying to fathom how his own son could commit such a heinous crime. The murderer was sentenced to death this year for the death of the girl, Haley Owens. Her family, as well as the family of the murderer, lobbied to change Amber Alert laws so they can be issued faster after a kidnapping is reported. A similar thing happened here, but with a happier ending. A bunch of people were outside, middle of the day, and a guy on a moped just pulled up and grabbed a little girl right in front of everyone. Some of the adults chased the moped out to the main road, but he got away. I actually passed the guy myself driving home, but no Amber Alerts had been issued and no one knew about it until he was long gone. He drove her out to this area that is just trees and swamp, but it's still kind of a moderately busy road since people use it to avoid traffic. A school bus driver had been late leaving the school that day and just happened to see a man park his moped and walk off into the woods with a little girl, but again, the Amber Alert still hadn't been issued, so she had no idea what was going on. She went home, made dinner, and went to bed and watched the news that morning before leaving and realized she may have seen the kidnapper. She called the police and they went out to the area with search and rescue dogs and found the little girl chained to a tree. He had sexually assaulted her, kissed her on the forehead and left her in the woods to die, but thanks to the bus driver, she was found in time. I can't imagine being out in those woods all night, and I'm an adult. There are bears, coyotes, snakes, and millions of biting bugs. It had even stormed that night because I remembered being worried for her when it started raining. The real fucked up thing is that this wasn't his first offense and he'd just gotten out of jail from his last sex crime when he took this little girl. It's just so fucked up. She was taken 4 houses down from my brother's house. She was always walking that neighborhood alone. Most of the time we saw her she was trying to catch her dog. My brother caught it once and took her home, he said the mom didn't even say thanks and acted annoyed he was even helping her bring the dog home. That girl had a shit life and a shittier stepdad, who was recently charged with some child porn shit. It was such a terrible thing to happen to a girl that was, from the looks of it, already had a terrible life. I still cry for her sometimes. EY had witnesses, a license plate number, and with that, surely it'd take mere seconds to run a license plate check. Did the police not respond immediately? I don't understand how the cunt had time to do what he did when the police were called as he was driving off. Only a week off? Damn, that's no time at all. So you found out that he was the coach, but separately found out he was the theology teacher's son? Yeah, it was mostly just a wild thing to hear at my school because a faculty member was related to the criminal. My grandma, born in 1905, once told me a story about when she was a kid, probably around 1912 or so. One of her great-aunts died at home. It was a rural community, so they didn't bother to get a doctor in, and in the tradition of the time the body was laid out at the house to let relatives pay their respects. Normally you'd have to worry about the body beginning to decompose, but it was the middle of winter in Nebraska, so they just put her in an unheated back room. She lay there for 3 days. When they finally went to bury her, the body was still warm. And they buried her anyway. At this point in the story I said, Grandma. And she looked sort of embarrassed and said, well, apparently nobody liked her very much. Hey. I was driving home from work one night around 9 p.m. midweek, so the roads were quiet. As I was driving downhill, I heard a sound that was like a jet engine roaring behind me. The next thing I know, a car goes flying past me going twice the speed limit. It looked like a fairly old crappy car. The car started to get the speed wobbles, and then one of the tires came flying off and rolled at speeds downhill whilst the car spun out and crashed. I stopped my car to make sure whoever inside was okay. A guy got out of the car and looked over at me, then started moving extremely quickly towards me. I don't know why, but I hit my internal locks on the car, which was fortunate because no more than 2 seconds later the guy started grabbing at the driver's side door and smashing on my windscreen with his fists trying to get in. I'll never forget the crazy look he had in his eyes. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove off back home. I decided to swap cars once I got home and drove back to see what was going on. I saw 2 fire trucks and about 4 police close to where the incident happened. When I got back to the crash site, the guy was no longer there, so I decided to head home. The next day at work, I was online bored reading the news when I saw an article that shocked me. The article was about a guy who had been in a police chase for 1 hour and the police stopped chasing him because it was becoming too dangerous. Turns out the guy was high on meth, had stolen a car an hour's drive away, and had been in a hot pursuit since. After crashing the car, the guy apparently crossed to the other side of the road and hailed the first car that appeared, which was a taxi. He got into the taxi and stole it. In the process he pushed the driver out of the driver's side door and the driver got stuck and dragged at speeds. The driver died from the incident. I called the police and had a detective assigned to me. He fingerprint checked my car and got a statement. I had to testify in the Supreme Court as a key witness in a murder trial. The guy got 30 years and they told me that my testimony was one of the main factors in convicting him. I often think back to that night and wonder if I hadn't locked my doors, would I have been the one who got murdered? Edit. Found the article about it. He got 17.5 years, not 30. A man who murdered a Melbourne taxi driver during a violent rampage 2 years ago has been sentenced to 17.5 years jail. This is a hometown story that stayed with me. It happened literally right around the corner from where I grew up, maybe a 2-minute drive away. Judy Kirby murdered 6 children and 1 adult by intentionally driving the wrong way on a divided highway in an attempt to commit suicide. She had been hospitalized for depression, but had also just ended a relationship with her ex-husband's brother and was by some reports involved in drug trafficking and fearing an imminent arrest. She picked up her sister's son, who was celebrating his 10th birthday that day. She then loaded her 3 children into the car, supposedly to pick up a gift for the nephew. Instead, she went missing with the carload of kids. A short time later, calls started coming into 911 about a car going the wrong way down the highway at a high rate of speed. They made it about 90 seconds before a head-on collision with another vehicle, driven by a father with 2 children and another child along for the ride. The crash annihilated both vehicles. The only survivors were Kirby herself, and the child who was along for the ride in the other car. There were pieces of children all over the highway. She was sentenced to 215 years in prison. A friend of a friend was traveling in the UK and had to hitchhike. He dropped her off at home. The next day police came knocking and proceeded to take her to the station and demand how she knows this man, what is their relationship, etc. She finds out that the man had killed another female hitchhiker that same day and had her in the trunk at the same time he was driving her, the friend. For some unknown reason he hadn't killed her. She couldn't sleep and cried for days and her home was placed on watch.